NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement: Layer 8 is going virtual. The conference, which is largely focused on social engineering, will be held on Saturday, June 6th. Look at the beautiful graphic Johnny made. There's an Easter egg in there, too. Make sure you go look for it.
You said Layer 8. I thought initially you said Larry. I'm like, Larry's going virtual?
Layer 8. Larry is virtual right now via
Enunciate.
Zoom. Security Week. So Saturday, June 6th, Security Weekly listeners save $20 off by visiting layer8conference.com. Use our promo code Security Weekly before selecting your ticket. Layer 8 is supporting a number of charities that you can donate to in the ticket purchasing process, so make sure you do that. Some of the Security Weekly team will be on the Discord channel for Layer 8 in our own channel, answering questions and doing some contests. Also, learn how hidden vulnerabilities lead to application compromise in our next webcast with Sneak. I'm super excited about this because Sneak has been creating some awesome content, which I use to help secure some of our containers. And Sneak has just been selected as the platform that Docker will use to help scan some of the Docker images in Docker Hub, actually all of them. So register for our upcoming webcast with them by going to securityweekly.com/webcast. If you missed one, go to securityweekly.com/on-demand. The last one that I did with Core Security, now a help systems company, I showed you a string of vulnerabilities and exploits that you could easily underestimate in your prioritization of vulnerabilities, and how those can be used to not only gain root access to your containers, but fully compromise the underlying Docker host. So lots of cool stuff. Speaking of cool stuff, we were talking briefly about, being on quarantine and doing stuff in our homes and wiring stuff, and Larry's working on electrical wiring. I'm up to like 6 access points in my in my home.
Oh, geez, Paul, how many do you need?
Well, I mean, I had the original 3, and then I bought new ones, and I was like, I could use one outside, and then I'm like, well, if I have one outside in the back, like, I really want to be, if I'm like checking my mail at the mailbox in the front of my house, I really want to be able to go on my phone and still be on my Wi-Fi, or if I'm talking to my neighbors, which I do a lot of right now because we all have young children and we're all outside talking, I want good Wi-Fi coverage, so I'm mounting one in the garage. This part of the whole, it's out of control.
Did you turn down like the whole threshold and power distribution on those?
So that's what I'm on. That's exactly what I'm on now, is looking into how I distribute the clients across there and manage the interference and coverage amongst all 6 access points across multiple spectrums, right? Because some are BGN, some are NAC, right? And then Jeff's holding up his bullshit card. Is that just to throw me off?
It sounds like a personal problem to me, Paul.
Right? But then, Tyler, you got me thinking about last week. I don't know if it was on air or not. You were like, well, what about when you ran one Ethernet cable and thought that was going to be enough, and then you dropped like a small switch, and then what if you have different devices you want to put on different VLANs? So I broke down and I ordered 3 more switches, which are Cisco SG250 series, makes an 8-port managed Cisco switch, and I got a great price on those. I got 3 of them for like $400, and so those are going to replace my remote locations, also be trunk ports to carry the VLAN information, so that I can segment in all my different segmented areas, and it's all leading up. I really want to do a webcast similar to the one that Joff did.
Is that documented in Visio?
Yes, and there's going to be a Visio diagram,
There's
like
gonna
the
be a
whole
diagram, baby.
Because we're all like we're at home, so we got to like make sure our home network is operating in the optimal performance.
Now,
You know
Paul,
what you need next?
you've got to be
You're
careful.
going to need a better pipe home and probably redundancy.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. And then
That's
I got to
right.
upgrade my internet, so I'm definitely going to do that. Yes.
Paul always
Next, he's
needs a
going
better
to be
pipe at
running.
home,
He's
if you know
going to
what
be
I mean.
asking for a provider that'll exchange BGP routes with him.
Right.
He will go multi-homed. Like
It's going to be
you
awesome.
watch him go.
Point to the studio.
Yeah, you're like, so what routing protocol are you using at home? Is it BGP or is it IGMP? What is it? What is it? Is it OSPF?
It's a beautiful thing, Paul. But if you run IPv6 though, depending on how many VLANs you got, be careful with those trunks because IPv6 is multicast heavy.
Oh, interesting. It's
That IPv6 will bite you every time.
so my strategy right now is just to turn it off. That's really which is bad.
If you, I spent like 4 days. I actually got really interested and wrote an entire how to secure a perimeter with IPv6 blog. So if anybody's interested in that, go to Black Hills and you'll see it.
Definitely on the list.
I researched it soup to nuts.
Yeah.
That's
Mostly
actually pretty
nuts.
awesome. I've actually looked into that, and that's not easy to do.
So I just put a seminal blog out there because I couldn't find anything on it. I'll be honest. There was nothing out there.
There wasn't anything good that you could understand anyway, like from a simple standpoint. Like unless you're doing full IPv6 to IPv4 handout and you're in an enterprise with enterprise gear, it didn't work.
Right. And I called this part 1, and this thing's like a 10-page blog.
Right, yeah.
It's nuts.
That's awesome. Definitely.
But it's called Securely Deploying IPv6 in 2020, Part 1, Internet-Facing Perimeter. So go check it out.
Sweet.
All I can say is it's about time.
Larry, you had mentioned this Marcus Hutchins Wired interview. I saw it, but I did not read it.
I thought it was fantastic in that it really Marcus really talked about where he
Larry,
came
we can't
from.
hear you, Larry.
Oh,
Really?
I can hear Larry.
I can hear him. It's just you, Joe.
I can hear Larry. Johnny, what's going on?
Oh, and so this article, Wired coverage can be a little spotty, but there are some great writers at Wired, and then some other ones I'm like, eh. Well, of course, Andy Greenberg is just one of the most amazing journalists ever, and did this article. So
It really gave Marcus's whole story from, like how he got into information security, how he got started with the computers, through so many of us, it was like he escaped because he got picked on and he got bullied, and he didn't want to have to deal with people, and then he learned about
Then he got picked on and bullied by the U.S. government. You could say,
maybe a little bit, but yeah. There were a couple of things that were pretty shocking that sort of came out in that. I think one of the big ones was actually how much meth he had taken to fuel some of his coding practices, which he fully admits.
I think if he, and I haven't read the article, but I think if he can admit that he did make some mistakes, like all of us do, right?
He did.
We all make mistakes, right? But recognize that he did and be a better person for it. He has my utmost respect, right? And that's kind of what I sense from his story, right? Like that, I made mistakes along the way, but has largely recognized them and grown from it, right?
Yep, absolutely. And we all do these things. We all make mistakes, and admit it. And that's really what he did. Was he was admitting that he made mistakes, and he's much the better person for making those mistakes now.
But he did a lot of good too. I don't want to downplay that in the article as well.
For sure.
Right? Like the mistakes were the minority, like in terms of percentage, right, from the good stuff that he's done. Is also kind of what I garner from just covering Marcus's story over the years.
Yep. I mean, from looking at the article when he was, as he was telling the story, he said he had good intentions for doing things. Like he never wanted to create a banking malware stuff. So he refused to, and he could see where his quote business partner was going, that he wanted to turn into a banking Trojan, and he said no. But turns out the business partner just went and got someone else to do it for him, and then said, "Hey, Marcus, you need to put this in your code. Well, otherwise you're not going to make any money. And oh, by the way, I have your home address because I've mailed you shit, and I can turn you over to the feds."
So people took advantage of him along the way.
Absolutely, and he admits that he got taken advantage of because of his own mistakes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I want to ask questions, but I also want to read the article, and I don't want to have any spoilers out there. So I will defer.
Yeah, given that I've seen the journalist who covered it and such, I definitely want to read it too and form my own opinions. Jeff, I agree.
Well, let me ask this question, Larry. Do you think that the article tells the full story, and does it do justice to all sides to the story? Let's say.
I think it does.
Good. Then don't tell me any more. I want to read it.
Okay. And you may disagree with me. It is definitely told from the story from Marcus's side, but I think they also made a fair, and he did a great job, being fair about the government's role, U.S. government's role, and their tactics and so forth. So I think it was fair.
Maybe we'll revisit it later after we've all had a chance to read it.
Tyler,
maybe we can get Marcus on the show.
Hold on, Tyler. Are you rocking a tank top right now? Is that what's? What is going on?
We can't see him.
We can't see it.
Oh, it's beautiful,
Say something.
man.
Say something.
Are you going to Bermuda? Is it?
Hey, Tyler, flex a muscle for us, man. Come on.
He probably can't hear us. His camera's dead. Wait.
He's flexing his brain muscle.
Oh, Tyler.
He totally can't hear us. Right now.
Now we're seeing, is that his security cameras? Is that what? Anyway, I just.
What's his battery power down to?
I wanted to
zero.
go to.
He had to switch cameras.
I wanted to go to a really fun story and kind of a Peter Griffin, like what really grinds my gears kind of moment.
Lindsay Lohan?
The Lindsay Lohan, yes.
Yeah.
In Stuxnet, right? So there was an article from Dark Reading, right? Which they make a lot of articles, right? A lot of, some good, some not so good, to be quite honest. And they talked about the top 3 cybersecurity myths. And we'll go through them. We can debate each one as much or as little as you want. So basically, myth 1, security team is going to protect me. Myth 2, IT professionals don't fall for cyber attacks. Myth 3, cyber attacks are confined to the digital world. And also, what I thought was really interesting was the perspective this article had on physical security. They state that there are other examples, too, of physical security being important. The Stuxnet worm that ravaged Iran's Natanz nuclear facility was delivered via a flash drive that was plugged straight into one of the facility's computers. Just reading into that sentence, because it overlaps with my research, right? So I want to say, look, yeah, they did that, sure. It was in, however, collaboration with both U.S. and Israeli spy agencies, right? So CIA and Mossad were both involved in that operation to some capacity to be able to do that. So, like, if you're an attacker with access to the CIA and or Mossad, you might have some pretty good success doing that. They also, as part of this attack, had an insider that if you factor into the compile times of the malware and infection times, that there were earlier versions of Stuxnet basically that were infecting computers much quicker because they had an insider. Later versions had a longer time between compile time and infection time, which means, did they lose their insider? Was their insider killed and or detained by the Iranian government, right, in that process? Some things we may never know about this operation, right? So you have to factor that in, that, not only did they have international spy agencies. They also leveraged probably those spy agencies to leverage insiders within there to get this malware installed via USB thumb drives. They also, which I think is sometimes left out of some of the details in this entire attack, is they, in some timeline, they also infected Step 7 Siemens controller project files, right? Which you would create on a workstation that maybe is connected to the internet. You create that project file. Stuxnet infected that project file. They then took that project file over on a USB thumb drive and plugged it into a control system that was on the air-gapped network. It's like a nuanced thing. It wasn't necessarily an infected USB thumb drive. The infection happened on a computer that they knew would have a thumb drive plugged into it to copy the file, which carried the payload in the malware that then infected the system, that they would take that over to the air-gapped network.
Which is probably one of the vendor's laptops, right? Like, that's typically how that works.
It could be a contractor, right? Tyler, you're absolutely correct, right? And so, yes, physical attacks are in play. Will they all go to this length? Likely not. I mean, if you overtake a Middle Eastern country and start enriching uranium with intent of harming other countries, you might be subject to this, this level of attacks. Now, having said that, there are other earlier versions of Stuxnet, and I didn't know any of this. This book is absolutely fascinating to put in this context, right? The earliest versions of I think it was Flame, right? That was the kind of like precursor that was infecting other systems in other countries to gain intelligence about, like, how is Iran obtaining the centrifuges, right? How are they obtaining the technical data to understand how to build them? Like, getting the supplies and learning how to build them are two different things. And there was malware several years before any of us ever uttered the word Stuxnet and ever dreamed that this malware could exist. Several years prior, they were doing intelligence gathering. Let's put that in context of a previous conversation about a pen test and a red team, right? I mean, your typical time frame is weeks, and then as they get more advanced, maybe months. I mean,
yep.
Tyler, Larry, others, have you done an engagement that's gone across 3?
How can you emulate a real-world attacker from the standpoint of APT in a time box scenario?
That's going here, right?
That's the difficult of taking a red team and calling it a red team that is doing true emulation.
Right.
You can only do that so much, but that still means you have to have that extended time period and very specific goals. And if those goals are to destroy or gain access to a power grid and kill a very large transformer, likely that's going to have some caveats put into a red team as far as a real engagement goes, because you're not going to stand up a transformer. You're not going to be able to get the equipment. You're not going to be able to build a centrifuge and be able to test against that as a what if from a red team standpoint.
Right, like the labs, Tyler, in the labs in the U.S. and that were like on our side, and also making the assumption
PNL, INL.
The U.S. has not confirmed that it was the U.S. Let's just throw that out there. However, all the evidence points to it was a collaborative operation between U.S. and Israel, right? I mean, we all know this. There's nothing 100% definitive. No one's admitted to it, but the evidence we have leads us down this path. But when you look into, but what I didn't know about this particular attack that I think is interesting when we think about physical attacks and how they could manifest against various organizations, Stuxnet stands out because it wasn't just that they were destroying centrifuges. And I think that's the common narrative that we as security professionals may come to understand, that, oh, we wrote a virus, it destroyed centrifuges. Oh my God, was it so much more than that? They were not only controlling the pressure valves, right? So not controlling the spinning of the centrifuge, but controlling the flow of the gas in and out of those centrifuges was one tactic. The other tactic was not just slowing them down and speeding them up to make them crash and blow up, but slowing them down so it slowed the enrichment process down, such that the end product was 25 to 50% less than would have normally gotten because all we did was
they
just
had to replace all that hardware. Continually having to replace that hardware. Wait for the ship time, wait for the vendor to come put it in because they thought they had faulty hardware because the numbers had to make sense.
Yes.
There's math that correlates to this, and when that output doesn't end up meeting that, how can you explain it if you're not thinking about the attack and cyber side of that?
In some cases, they attribute it to when they constructed the centrifuges, they weren't wearing gloves, and the oils from people's hands were getting on the centrifuges, which was disrupting it, which is actually a real thing. And so just
wasn't the real problem.
The intricacies in this attack are just absolutely amazing. And while
the intricacies are amazing, Paul, but I do want to make a comment. Oh, you can hear me. Amazing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff.
If you look back at the original article for a minute, the first sentence is, with millions of employees now attempting to work from home, it's vital to challenge misconceptions about cybersecurity. How is a nation-state attack relevant to that opening sentence at all?
It's not.
Well, now, but to your point, Joff, somewhat kind of an offshoot in my thinking was when we think about physical attacks, right? This article also leads off with, a female entered our corporation's headquarters, said that she just got into a car accident. We asked her if she was okay, and she said, "Yeah, I just need to use your restroom." And when she went to go use the restroom, lo and behold, she used a USB thumb drive to compromise multiple computers. The article talks about that as like this implausible scenario. It actually sounded like from the article that that's a real scenario. I think if any of us on this show and listening, right, had to construct a social engineering attack knowing what we know, it would probably look like that or something similar, right?
I mean,
so that is not implausible in my, I absolutely, John.
That's way too complex. We do that. We do it way easier than that.
I think the article...
You walk in, you look like you own it, and you just go do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think the article completely missed the target. They're trying to highlight myths about working from home and cybersecurity. Well, come on.
Right. So then my thinking, Joff, is, well, hold on. If we're not all working at the corporate headquarters, does that mean that some of us might come under attack in our homes?
Of course,
it's to some capacity, right? I mean, we talked about this, Larry, actually years ago on the show when Wi-Fi was even way more insecure than it is now, right? In early days, and that you could, through means of open source intelligence gathering, figure out where strategic people were working from home. And their home wireless networks are way easier to break into than the corporate one. So that's just the next step to translate to physical attacks.
So pulling that example out instead of Stuxnet would have, or an example that's analogous to that would have been a much better.
Agreed, Josh. 100%. 100%. Yep. Larry?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering how we got on Stuxnet from 3 top cybersecurity myths. But that's just.
Well, they mentioned it in the article, Jeff, because one of their security myths was.
But we've spent an inordinate amount of time on it.
Enunciate, Jeff.
Inordinate.
What are you holding up, Jeff? What is that?
This is that girl that broke into your network. She knows which buttons to push. This is advertising. She looks
like a cybersecurity threat, by God.
This is advertising from the late '90s. This is a hacker. She's on a Windows 95 box.
This is what a hacker looks like.
Oh,
that's what a hacker looks like.
It's a stereotypical hacker. It's I just want to relate some experience here. That is not my stereotypical experience. I'm just saying. I mean,
in any respect, right? Hacking or otherwise.
Sorry, Larry, did you have comments about hacking into people's Wi-Fi?
Yeah, it's still largely the same. I mean, there's been some improvements to Wi-Fi for us to not be attacking high-value targets at home, but so much of it is still the same. Some of the same theories still apply. You just might need to work a little harder to get the information that you need.
Yep.
But it's all still relevant to those same things that we were talking about years ago.
Yep.
Again, it's just harder to get that data.
Well, you were saying something interesting. Sorry,
Larry. To Jeff's advertisement.
Yeah.
Cleaning boxes, deep cleaning. Yesterday, I found the SANS on-site guide in which we did the podcast at SANS in Las Vegas the first time.
Oh, that was a pivotal moment in Security Weekly history.
Isn't it fun to be home and be able to clean your office out?
Right.
Dig up all this.
I also found the brochure from White Wolf when they had the exercise prior to Net Wars. and we were the hosts.
Yep. All
that's
that.
awesome. That is
Needless
awesome.
to say, all that went in the recycling bin.
Now, Larry, it's interesting as I start to dabble back into some of the Wi-Fi stuff. You told me something interesting that Kismet, which Mike has done just a fantastic job in keeping up with that. I tell you what, I went to the Kismet. One thing that impressed me, I went to Mike's website and I was like, all right, how do I get this on Ubuntu 20.04? And Mike's like, oh, dude, we got you covered. Like, there's a package repo, you just add it, and then you do apt get and install. Yeah. I'm like, dude, I remember like how much I love you. Like, really, like that. It was really touching to me that Mike had done that. But you told me something interesting. That when you run Kismet now, it is in the background collecting and identifying those packet captures you need to be able to do WPA cracking without doing a deauth attack, correct?
Correct. It collects the PMK ID of observing clients joining those networks, joining those networks without doing the attacks, and the PMK ID of the beacon frames. So no active attacks needed.
Ooh,
it's so much fun. I was showing my kids at home, right? Because it was work from home day, school from home day. And I was showing that to them. And it's funny, now we refer to our neighbors by their Wi-Fi SSIDs. The most hilarious one is one of my neighbors owns a funeral home, and his SSID is Funerals Rock. So, like, I walk by, I'm like, what's up, Funerals Rock? Hey. I'm like, what's up, cheeseburgers are awesome.
So am I the only one hoping he's not working from home?
Right.
Wow, Paul, you know which buttons to push.
Oh my.
Yep.
So,
why didn't
he call his network dead serious? That's what I'm wondering.
Right.
Nice. I don't get a chance to figure out who my neighbors are for those types of things, but I was having a moment the other day with my SANS class doing the live online teaching remotely, and I was showing them Kismet. And you know, everybody says nobody runs web networks anymore, and I'm like, look right here in my active Kismet stuff. There's a web network, because when FiOS came through and they deployed all these Action Tech routers, they were all web, and I'm realizing I still have an Action Tech router from those days in my basement running to supply all the data for the set-top boxes, and I disabled that years ago. Did I really?
Right.
Or you think you did, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but I think that to get back to this article, the myth that cyber attacks are confined to the digital world, I think there's a lot of layers to peel back there, right? Like we're talking about Wi-Fi attacks and being in physical proximity, maybe to a high-value target that's working from home, which in today's world is, very likely an attack vector. I do want to, maybe cover some of the other ones. The security team will protect me, and that IT professionals don't fall for cyber attacks. I don't know that these...
I've been waiting to talk about myth number one.
Okay, let's do myth number one. The security team is going to protect me. Therefore, basically what the article, the way I read it, was that users kind of have this assumption that they don't need to pay attention to security because we have a security team and they're going to take care of it.
Absolutely. I think that is pernicious in most organizations, because there's, and I want to ask a question in response to this, but many users, many employees in companies assume that because of whatever security program, whatever security teams exist, and they already know that they are blocked from going to certain websites, and certain emails that they send get blocked, or they can't put on attachments, they can't download applications and load them and all that kind of stuff. They assume that security is somebody else's responsibility.
Yep.
And I think that's not necessarily a myth, but I think it's a mistake. But the flip side of that is so much of the security vendor side of the industry is trying to promote and push, and we talk about it all the time, automation. We got to have technology that attempts to do all the security for everybody. So where's the middle ground there? Because security teams certainly try to do all the security for everybody, but I mean, I have an opinion, but I want to hear other people's opinions. What's the middle ground?
Yeah, because I think it's too much of a generalization to say that security is everyone's responsibility. Like, what does that mean? Or security is the security team's responsibility. I think that everyone has a certain level of responsibility dependent upon what your role is in the organization. So let's say you're the CEO and founder of the organization. I think one of the primary roles that you play in terms of security is establishing processes that make your business more resilient, right? I think when you get down to I
disagree, but keep going.
I think when you get down to the user level, you do have some level of responsibility, but largely your responsibilities are more about getting your job done, having some knowledge and awareness of security vulnerabilities, input into the process to make sure that there is integrity into the process so that there are no security vulnerabilities. The security and IT teams have a different set of responsibilities. Now, I think utopia is we build security and processes and technology for the business where the users have much less kind of worry and responsibility about security. I don't think we're there yet. I still think there is a responsibility for security that's shared in everyone that works in the organization. At what level depends on a lot of different variables: the maturity of your company, your processes, the what vertically, the whole thing. There's a lot of variables in there.
I think that I want to rebut your initial statement a little bit in terms of the primary responsibility of the CEO. I think it's more than what you said. It's to set an example that security is something that's going to be done, and the security rules and regulations and annoying things that you have to do are all going to be taken seriously. So I think really CEOs need to sort of set the bar, lead by example, that security is something you do. Because you know, and I know, and most of us, we all know that the worst offenders, and it sort of drifts down to myth number 2, the worst offenders of whatever the existing cyber rules, security rules are that in organizations are typically the admins and those with privileged access, or it's the people that, like, I know the rules, but I also have to get my job done, and I know I'm cheating, but I really have to do this because the boss wants it done, and that's where setting the example from the top down that we're going to follow the rules, even though they're a little bit painful at times and they're a little bit cumbersome at times. We're going to do it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that we, as leaders and security professionals, need to have security not be as much of a hurdle. And I know it's a balance between security and usability, right? And I think it's a great leader that recognizes, for example, hey, we need to share this data. Let's build the easiest way possible in the most secure way possible to share this data, and let's stick to that. I think if it's something that, and I agree, Jeff, sometimes as leaders and others in the organization, we're like, I need to get stuff done, and it's easier for me to go down and share this document in an insecure manner rather than a secure manner, and it's just easier to do it more insecurely, right? And we need to recognize that there are more secure ways to do this, and let's have a process that makes it easier to do it more securely, and a process that puts some checks and balances in there to make sure that when we are doing this process, that we're not going to be the victim of fraud, right? And I think that's not just a security thing. That's a great business leadership thing, right? It's the integrity of your business, right? We're not going to process this, claim for $2 million or whatever it is. We're going to have a process that checks to make sure that that person is who they say they are, right? And we're going to leverage as much security technology as we can to validate that. But sometimes a lot of what catches fraud today is the process. It's the fact that I need to send a fax. It's the fact that I need to talk to someone, right? When I talk to, the Armor Bloxes and Great Horns of the world that have fantastic technology to prevent that business email or other communication method compromise, what they'll also say is we have to rely on processes and checks and balances to make sure that fraud is not being committed.
I actually had another thought just now, and it ties back to our first segment with Jason and talking about, sort of our problem as security professionals with communication and good communication. I've been to too many organizations where the security organizations are they live behind locked doors. They're in basically skiffs. They're isolated from the rest of the organization, and they exude this persona of, we're watching everything, we're monitoring everything. You can't do anything without our knowledge, so don't you dare try to break all the rules. And I think that sort of perpetuates this myth that the security team is going to protect me because they've got eyes on everything. Yeah. So maybe part of the solution to debunking this myth or demystifying it is somehow tied to this need to get out and leave your sock in your knock and go out and hang out with your coworkers and talk to them about security and how involved it is and all the nuances and processes and things like that.
I agree, and I think the balance that many of us have to work with is there are times when we need to be isolated and get stuff done and really focus on the objectives and largely technical tasks, right? But we have to balance that, to your point, Jeff, with communicating and working with our coworkers to make them understand some of the details about the threats, to help them and our organization understand risk tolerance, what goes into the risk equation, which we've talked about on various different shows, and very much a theme on your show, Jeff, Security and Compliance Weekly, right? There's a lot of factors that go into it, some of which can be, highly automated, many of which are largely subjective, right? And we were talking about this, I think, on Enterprise Security Weekly, right? Like the impact and probability and or likelihood, the elements to risk are largely subjective. And I think an opportunity for technical security people to come out of the dark basement, right, and talk to people about that, and not just talk to them and say, no, you can't do this, right? Like actually talk about the risk, like what is the likelihood, the probability, the impact, and also know when to stop talking and listen too. Right. Well,
and talking about it in a way that is understandable and makes sense, and not the sky is falling, because like the parable, kid's story, if you're running around saying the sky is falling too much, people tend to ignore you.
Right.
And not every vulnerability is drop everything that we're doing, we've got to fix this now. Some are. Not all of them.
But I think that's my point with Stuxnet too, right? Because you could look at that as an example and say, oh my God, the sky is falling. Like, what if someone were to go to that lengths to compromise our organization, right? That's oftentimes the wrong approach, right? You got to put that in perspective and manage and balance risk with the business, understand the threats, and have a more methodical approach rather than just looking at, oh my God, there could be physical attacks and we have to prevent against every single one of them, right?
Well, I think a similar, and maybe it's a little bit easier to understand, maybe it's harder to understand, I don't know, but Spectre and Meltdown. The devastating, oh my God, there's issues at the core of the systems. Yeah, but what does that really mean to most people?
Right.
I think one of the issues there, though, really is we end up with, like this week, for example, looking our news links, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different breaches that have happened. And so the noise level from all the breaches, well, if these guys can't protect themselves and this happens, like we can't do anything, or, breaches are going to happen. That kind of mantra and stigma has also it's making, this less impactful. Like we don't even remember the breaches last week because we've got 10 new this week. So really it's become almost an overexposure of what's going on from a defensive standpoint and who can actually defend against it and who's in the news lately. Like does it even matter if we get breached? It's starting to take some of the onus and some of the responsibility and some of the pressure off of a lot of these companies because they just chalk it up to APT.
Well, and what's interesting, Tyler, my story number 11, so EasyJet had a data breach, 9 million customers are affected. And what I gleaned from this article was a comment from a security vendor, and I don't think it's I wouldn't starkly disagree with this comment, but this person said many, however, still need to understand that there's a better way to manage security, risk, and compliance requirements, and it certainly is not what we've always done. In an industry, speaking to the airline industry, that has defined automation and process efficiencies, applying the same to information security would quite literally revolutionize their ability to detect, respond, and mitigate against largely traditional raft of attack TTPs that we've seen targeted at the aviation space this past decade. Do you agree? Do you agree with that? I don't know if I starkly disagree with that, to be honest with you.
Well, I don't disagree, but okay, let's dissect that. If someone had that solution, and I kind of ping on this a little bit because it's a nuance that journalists just take. If you just did this, it would go away.
Yeah.
If it was easy, companies that are spending billions of dollars would have done it. So it is not just a solution that someone has come up with. So I think that this is kind of one of those nuances where you can't just say, if you just did this and revolutionized it, well, how? How do you do that? And if you figured that out, let us know, because you've now got a multi-billion-dollar business that could then tackle that problem and help the entire world.
Yeah, and while I don't necessarily disagree with this statement, I will say that there are very interesting differences between building an automation for a business process, where I think you can more closely define the knowns and unknowns, right? And so, for example, in our own processes, right, in defining software, in our process, we're like, I want to be able to create episodes and segments into the future, right? And there's some stuff that we know and stuff that we don't know. Those are pretty easily definable, right? Like, I know there's a company that wants to appear on the show 2 months from now, and maybe I know the topic they want to talk about, and I know the company that wants to, book that reservation. And so we can start to define and design software around that. When you get to security, there's so many unknowns, right? Like, there's just way too many variables to be able to build an automated process around detection and response. It makes it, I think, harder.
The business can fit within inside of those automations, right? Because at the end of the day, we've said this before, making money is the capitalist idea. That's the point of being in business. And so if this security and automation hinders that ability for business to happen in the way that it must happen for the clients and the way the business model is set up, then that defeats the purpose. Why are you securing something that is not going to be a viable business option?
Yeah, because the attacker techniques change, your own defenses change, and with this whole pandemic, your complete architecture changes, right? And the variables that changes in security is just staggering compared to, I think, when, in this comparison to the aviation industry, there's a pretty well-defined process for, you have passengers, they want to get in a plane, they want to go from point A to point B, right? There's not too much change in some of those variables. And certainly September 11th changed a lot of those variables in a very significant way. The industry, adapted. I think that the digital and kind of cyber threats are kind of like the way the airline industry changed for September 11th. We're changing like that sometimes every day, sometimes every week, sometimes every month, right? There's a new attack. There's a new vector, right? There's just so many more variables.
You're taking an industry like ICS, right, that's designed to have these safety protocols and these long-standing, 20-year products within inside the environment. The aviation industry is very, very similar, and we're trying to take these kind of fly-by-the-wire, very multi-fail-proof systems and make them digital, and then try and sync them up, and then try and make the customer-facing side of that very, very convenient, and integrate all these real-time live pieces. These are things that are not they're not scaling and meshing in the way that everybody thinks they are. And so you really have to kind of compare apples to apples here and understand, well, the gist of what she's saying is viable, and yes, I believe that can be improved upon. It's not as simple as just fix it, right? Just now tell me how. I think that a lot of people miss the how of all this. Like from a high level, yeah, I get you want to secure all the things, you want these 5 controls in place, you want to hit these compliance marks, but how? With the budget you have, the resources you have, the time you have, and to maintain a viable business, how do you do that?
Well, and it's a great juncture. I think we've gone. It's 9:13, and we're on segment 3, and we haven't mentioned PCI yet. And I think Jeff wants to.
Yes, I do.
Very nice. I love the cards.
Crap. Drink.
Because
Jeff, how's your battery?
My battery. What did I do with my battery?
Is that your PCI battery? Your PCI. Oh, wait. Wrong card.
I'm fine.
I love the cards. I think it's awesome.
So the article, it begins with, and this is very common for companies that are breached. They were a target of a highly sophisticated cyber attack
all the time, right? What does that mean?
And it means, oh shit, we got caught. Throw that out there, and so we'll get pity from people. But then the next sentence is the result. Email addresses and travel details of 9 million customers and credit card details, including CVV numbers of 2,208 customers. Please tell me what's wrong with that statement.
You should not.
PCI.
Well, hold on. You should never. PCI. One of the things in there, right, says me as a merchant, I should not store CVV. The way I understand it, Jeff? Did I understand it correctly?
Absolutely.
I understood it correctly, and Jeff said, yes, I understood it correctly. Like, wow, I'm learning.
They should not, well, unless they were capturing transactions, while they were being processed.
Right.
But probably they had profiles of people for, credit card numbers on file so that you could, reserve a flight and click on the saved credit card. If they were saving the CVV numbers, big, huge violation, which means they fundamentally don't get security. They fundamentally don't get compliance. So it probably wasn't a highly sophisticated attacker. We're probably going to find out in the days and weeks and months to come that, it was default passwords and bad configurations and the usual suspects somewhere along the line.
Right. Larry, you're holding up some... You've got 13 hours, 37 minutes left. Or no, on your SD card.
You so lead. I love you.
You've got your SD card's bigger than Tyler's, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Oh,
See, there he goes.
More than double. Just impressive.
Ooh, Larry, love your SD card.
You so lead, Larry.
All
Wow,
I have to say
everybody
is
got
there were
quiet
a
when
lot
I
of
said that.
there were a lot of breach stories this week.
A lot of breach stories.
Oh, come on. Can we do the story Microsoft has embraced open source? I love that story.
It's amazing.
Oh, yes, please.
Right?
Please.
And so, I've been paying attention. Let's just put this out there. I'm a huge Linux advocate. A couple of years ago, I was like, I want to go all Linux. And I tell you what, as much as I would not have admitted that at the time, it was rocky in the beginning, right? I was switching from Apple and Mac over to Android and Linux. Like, it was a little rocky in the beginning. John Strand really kind of planted the seed with me this week, especially. And he's like, dude, I'm all in on Linux. And he was even the one that was like, I love Linux, but like I still got to use Windows because PowerPoint and all this other stuff, right? He's like, now there is this opportunity to go all Linux. And he was like, Ubuntu 20.04 is like, I'm like, dude, I'm right there with you, right? Like, we were totally nerding out on this on Enterprise Security Weekly this week. Then I see this article that kind of really validates John and I's kind of train of thinking in this whole thing, that Microsoft has done, to say it's done a complete 180 in terms of open source is an understatement, right? Microsoft, there's just, if you go back to early emails, even before this Balmer quote, right, which I'll read to you in a moment, even before that, Bill Gates's communications to the community, you can go back and read them. Like, they are documented and like attacking anyone who wanted to gain access to their source code in the early days. And we're talking like Altair systems, early days, right? Go back and like
really
way back,
early,
like
yes.
really early, was like, no, the software that I create, Gates was like, this is mine, and I'm going to sell it, right? Open source absolutely challenges that ideal, like 1,000%. And Microsoft was very, very anti-open source, right? That was their commodity, was their software. People should not just pay for software, but license software was the Microsoft ideal, right? Which is very interesting from a lot of perspectives. And in 2001, right, former CEO Steve Ballmer famously branded Linux as a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything it touches. That was in 2001. Now you come full circle. The leadership at Microsoft is like, yeah, open source is cool. Like basically Azure is 50+% running Linux. Microsoft Windows is running Linux, like fully supported Linux kernel running Linux. Like this is an unbelievable crossroads I think we're at now. John Stern is really, I don't know if he said this on the air or not, but is really calling for like, okay, we say this all the time every year, right? This is the year of the Linux desktop. Like I think it's really a reality, to be quite honest. If we look at what Chrome OS has accomplished, which is a Linux-based OS, and we look at the advances, especially in the more modern Linux kernels, 20.04 was absolutely a turning point for me. Jeff's holding up a card that says UID equals 0. I will concede that security is not quite there. In terms of Linux. When we look at all the different container breakouts, they're basically abuses of Linux primitives. And that scares me, right? But I think technology-wise, it's a really exciting time for Linux, and those of us that have been involved with Linux, for 20 years or more, it's just awesome.
And two things.
Sorry,
hold on. Larry, and then drop.
So, two quick things, Paul. I mean, I think I'm really hoping to see that. I tried to make the switch to Linux on the desktop a while back, and the apps that I needed to use on Linux were all horrible.
Yeah.
Like, either on Windows or the Mac, they were way better. And, I'm quite honestly starting to reevaluate potentially using Windows on the desktop. And I never thought I'd say that after going to the Mac. And Windows over Linux, specifically when we start seeing Microsoft's adoption of Linux kernel and Linux utilities, and then this week, the Microsoft Developer Conference or whichever it is going on this week, and they released Terminal and a package manager from the command line for Windows.
So basically, I mean,
like, I need to look at this again.
But what you're saying, Larry, is I'm going to switch to Windows because it also gives me access to Linux, and I get the best of both worlds.
Yep.
Getting there.
It's getting there, right?
A stable window manager, great applications, and the power of the Linux backend. That's what does it for me for the Mac.
Right.
Is I have this really sexy interface. Things look great. For the most part, they just work. And I can tinker with stuff on the back end and do all the things that I want to do. Like Windows, for me, it's a lot harder. And Linux, I can tinker with all the stuff on the back end. The problem is I can tinker with the stuff on the back end and nothing fucking works. Like, experience this week, go to install PCSCD scan on Linux, and it requires another package that you need to install, but it requires PCSCD scan to install. Like, we're still in this dependency
circular dependencies,
shit show.
Yeah. John was playing around with something, and I don't know what it was called. It was basically like almost like a container, but not. Basically statically compile all the binaries and put it in kind of like a container kind of thing to deal with that dependency issue. I think the issue that I have in terms of like Linux versus Windows is, I mean, like there's some stuff that you're like not going to get with Linux today. So I was, bored, and I'm like, quarantine. I'm like, I think we need a VR headset because that sounds really cool. And then I look into it, I'm like, Well, thankfully I have a Windows box, and that would enable me to do that, right? Like there are just certain things today that I think do absolutely require Windows, and I think that's what's gonna keep people on the Windows platform. And it's encouraging to see that. Well, by the way, if you run Windows, you can still run Linux at the same time, right?
So I'd like to make a comment.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm about where Larry is right now. I'm getting a little bit tired of some of the mistakes that Apple is making with the laptop platform. Apple's doing all the great things with all the toys, but I don't want a toy. Right?
What's wrong with your Apple? You don't even have it right now.
Yeah,
that's the point I think he's making.
That's somewhat tangential, but that is a related point. My concern with Linux on the Windows desktop so far has been lack of raw socket support, and I hope they address it. Raw sockets are kind of needed if you're a pen tester, and you're going to fire up like a Kali Linux or something like that on the Windows desktop. But I'm very close to going towards a Windows desktop for the next generation that I use because the flexibility is there and they're starting to do interesting things. Finally, I don't think I can make the leap over to Linux as the primary desktop and going in the other direction. But I'm thinking the two are basically converging, and it's kind of going to be a wash.
Right.
In the end.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd love to do a segment where I try and convince everyone to go full Linux, and you guys try and convince me not. I think that'd be awesome.
Well, you know,
it'd be fun.
What would kill
Or we try
Windows
it
as a desktop is if the Office team developed a native Linux product.
And that's what John's saying.
driven.
I mean, John's saying I can just use Office 365, and if that runs on Linux, then like I'm good.
Yeah, but
Right.
in a browser, it's not the same experience. It just
Interesting.
isn't.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, John's great. Love John. He's my boss and all that good stuff. But when I'm cranking out an 85-page report, I want the native MS Word client. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but we could give you a guacamole server to a Windows box. Which, by the way, I'm super impressed with guacamole and its ability for I was like, holy crap, that is awesome technology.
I'm going to tell you right now, if the Office team at Microsoft says we're going to do a native Linux implementation, they would nearly kill the Windows desktop. That would be my prediction. Because that's been a statement for decades now. They have been driving the sale of Windows as a platform. That product.
I mean, at this point, we should, why aren't we all just going latex? I mean, why are we stuck on Office? And I'm an
what the
Office
fuck, Tyler?
and for
Tyler,
the
like,
record,
what? Are you like a professor at a university now? And you, like, what?
And-
He's growing younger and older at the same time. What is happening?
And what happens with the tank top?
And for the record, it's not latex; it's latex.
Latex.
I'm just
Is that
not even
French
gonna
like
get
Mimi
into
Cats?
this. I think we should edit native PostScript. God damn it!
I feel like WordPerfect was that, right? Like
It was the perfect word.
it was
No.
basically like a Word document tagged language, basically, right?
Yeah,
I feel like we
Lee's got a
might
comment in
should
there.
wrap this shit up, but after that comment.
Wow, yeah.
I mean,
Just all right. We got to get back to some security stories before we go.
So I don't know,
Specifically,
calling tech and latex
You forgot.
and then
You forgot
maybe-
that I had a comment to make earlier
Jeff, make
on,
your comment, and then we're going to talk about
and we'll talk about this stuff.
QMail and DJB.
I forgot what you had said, but I was going to comment, and this was for the benefit of your kids and the homeschooling. My granddaughter discovered today that there's this thing called NickTalk.
TikTok. Is that like TikTok?
It's Nickelodeon TikTok.
Interesting.
Sounds
Anyway,
terrifying.
go on.
That sounds terrible.
It does sound sick.
So there, my story number 12. I thought this was absolutely fascinating. Daniel J. Bernstein, did I say that correctly? Right, is the very prolific computer scientist and security engineer. Created QMail, DJB DNS, right? And basically put out one of the first, like, basically bug bounties and was like, hey, I wrote this code in 1998, and I challenge anyone to find a security vulnerability. Now, in 2005, there was you got to go read this article, right? Because there's so many facts in here, and I haven't read an article in a long time where basically, like, I was like, I could summarize this article, but it's very well written and covers all the facts. Like, you should just go read it. My story number 12, wiki.securityweekly.com. It's episode 652. There was a researcher, Georgi Guninsky, found 3 vulnerabilities in 2005. Essentially, I want to say they were with a integer overflow that relied on a certain amount of memory being available to the process. And in 2005, the QMail process did not provide enough memory in its default configuration to allow people to access and exploit this vulnerability. The exploits were real, but dependent on the memory access, right? Fast forward to today, Qualys researchers discovered that there's another process that runs as part of QMail that doesn't have the memory restrictions as the other QMail process, and these vulnerabilities are, in fact, exploitable. Now, when DJB said, like, basically, he said that I run the QMail service with a low memory, restrictions, and that mitigates these vulnerabilities. Just the way this whole story unfolded. I mean, we look at QMail. I largely think in the security community as one of the most secure pieces of software out there. I mean, look, if you wrote something in 1998 and it's really only had 3 or maybe 4 CVEs attributed to it, you're doing pretty damn good. In fact, you're probably one of the most secure pieces of software out there, right? And Dan, stopped developing this in 1998. Has gone on to do all kinds of quantum cryptography research and all kinds of stuff. What's amazing to me is that QMail is not the only piece of software that Dan wrote that's awesome, right? DGB DNS and in a series of other pieces of software. Just an amazing story that, how many times have we seen a piece of software that was written in the late 90s that is that resilient, that there were 3 CVEs that were found 15 years ago that today people figured out how to exploit, that still, if you've implemented it correctly, are not vulnerable to even just those 3 vulnerabilities. Like, the whole thing is just an amazing story. And I really do encourage our listeners to go read up on that, because if we can borrow lessons from the implementation of this software, I think we'll all be in a better place. Comments? Challenges? Anyone challenge?
Yeah. No, I'm looking at the Daniel's bio, because I want to say you mentioned DJB DNS, and this threw a thing to me in that I want to say that I've interacted with Dan recently on a project based on our Weilin project for analysis of GPS satellites and their health. So, like, he's still out there doing this crazy stuff. If I remember, if it's the same Dan.
Crazy smart dude.
Yeah.
Like, and part of, like, when you read this article, like, go read up on Dan, and not just his accomplishments in creating QMail, right? Which largely, in some of this I take to heart. Joff, I don't know if, when we worked for universities, right, in a pretty similar time frame, I was a Unix admin, and we were largely doing...
I was too.
Right? And we were largely doing sendmail, and we were like, WTF? Like, can someone just write some goddamn code that can... Right? Can someone just write some goddamn code that can pass email messages without being exploitable? And then I have to go...
Mad respect if you could write a sendmail from the ground up, and I could at the time, and those sendmail configs were seriously messed up.
Right. And I think that was absolutely part of its downfall, right, was that sendmail.cf and all. It was just awful. And I remember, being the security person, being the Unix admin, I was like, oh, someone created a QMail. And I actually did some QMail installations after that because I was like, oh, screw that. Like at work, I'm dealing with SendMail, and it's a nightmare, right? Like if I'm going to run, because back in the day, you would run your own MTA, right? And I was like, I'm doing QMail. And I did some installations of it because I'm like, this software is awesome. So it's just kind of a cool, really awesome read and just really kind of fun story to go through.
True that. But when Postfix came out, then the sun came out completely. So I was sold when Postfix.
Yeah, Postfix is definitely another contender in that space for sure. I think that utopia is that none of us have to worry about running MTAs anymore. We leave that to other people.
Hey, I have a real quick question. Reading through the article, if you're a company and you're running Debian and you've got the QMail on it and you've got Qualys or whomever, I guess at this point, running a scan and finding these new vulnerabilities, and it says that there's an updated version available. Where do you go to get it? Because it doesn't say that in the article.
It's a great question, Jeff. It does sound to me like QMail has been forked into multiple different kind of distributions. So I would look at which kind of flavor of QMail you're running now. It also talks about there's a vulnerability in like one of the plugins for QMail as well. So I think it's going to require some investigation, like because development stopped, which is kind of weird, right? Like development stopped, and then some of the distributions like Debian picked up development of it, is my understanding, to kind of push it forward. So I don't have a definitive answer.
I guess what I'm beating around the bush on is, and it's PCI related, but if you're a company and then you're having to pass a scan for whatever reason, and you're seeing this vulnerability and you're going to try to fix it, I mean, maybe it's in the CVV. I should look at the CVV. Maybe it points to where you go to get the fix. But how do you fix unsupported applications that have not been updated for 22 years?
So Qualys wrote up. So this is from the article. Qualys wrote a patch for Debian's QMail package that fixes the QMail Verify issues, which is the QMail Verify, I think, was one of the plugins, right? In all three CVEs in QMail, the latter by hard coding a safe upper memory limit in the alloc function, which makes total sense, right? Actually, a pretty easy fix, probably pretty safe to implement, in my opinion, from what I know. About services running on Linux written in C, right? Using that function, probably pretty safe. And then there's an updated version 1.5 of QMail Verify with the issues fixed is available for download. The developers of Not QMail, so they forked QMail into a project called Not QMail. They wrote their own patches for all three 2005 CVEs. And have started to systematically fix all integer overflows and signedness errors in QMail, which largely, I mean, if I think about what all the other signedness issues are in QMail, the fact that it survived for 20 plus years without major incident, and us even covering it on the show, probably means they're not critical vulnerabilities. However, probably still pertinent that you keep up with the latest versions.
It's funny, Paul. I usually look up vulnerability information in CVEs using the Tenable plugin site, and they don't have these two CVEs listed.
Right. Well, because it was largely
because they're from Qualys.
Well, it was largely dependent on the memory limitations, right? It was Dan's kind of a original rebuttal to the 2005. Researcher who was like, these are vulnerabilities, but they are very greatly controlled by how much memory each process can run. So there was a very valid workaround in my assessment of this vulnerability, where things might not check for this vulnerability because of the workarounds that may be inherent to the configuration. Very interesting.
Of course, it's also not in the National Vulnerability Database, so I don't know what that means.
I looked at some of them I looked at there was an original article from George Gninsky that talks about all three. There's an article on his blog, and in the original, like, full disclosure type mailing list kind of thing about these CVEs. It is a fascinating story.
And for the record, I was wrong. It wasn't Dan. It was Bert between the DNS and GPS thing. So
Gotcha.
You could see how I was confused.
Yep.
No, you couldn't.
All right. Well, it's getting into the hinter hours.
Yeah.
It is.
Wait, I think
last
Lee
story.
should cover one of his stories.
Anyone want to pick a last story?
Last story.
What? How about one from Lee?
Well,
yeah,
I was
we should
actually
do a Lee story.
Well, I'm not. There's a couple I wanted to choose from. I just having trouble picking between them. Although I was intrigued by the iPhone hacks are no longer worth a lot of money.
We covered that last week.
So pick another one.
Pick another one.
Next.
Love you, Lee. Pick another one.
How about the Mandrake malware story?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
That was hot news, and I did not look at
malware that's been sitting around for 4 years.
I did not look into this one. What is the deal with this malware?
So this one, I was trying to remember what I did. I researched it quickly before pasting it up there, but it targets specific Android devices to provide complete control. But it's really stealth and under the cover, so nobody was seeing it until finally somebody realized what was going on. And they may have, tens of thousands of victims with it. Google Play picked it up finally. Things like AbFix, Coincast, SnapTube, and a few other things. It's just kind of interesting that this was basically relied on reviews of applications. People were saying these applications are cool, even though they had the malware in them, and that's how people got it put out everywhere.
Was it basically fraudulent reviews, Lee? You think that?
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. We talk about bots and bypassing things like reCAPTCHA and all that stuff. It's interesting, the kind of intersection between abusing technology and social engineering to get these apps in the store to violate the trust the user has with the ratings, right? I see some of that on Amazon. It's kind of somewhat related to price gouging as well. Like if I want to price gouge on Amazon, I may artificially inflate my ratings so that there are reviews that this product is great and they buy it at an inflated rate. Therefore, as a consumer, I have to be aware of what the actual cost of that device is. And I say device, it could be any product, right? In my case, I was looking at a specific, in this case, audio device, and I was like, oh, that's great. Like I can get it from Amazon, but it's $100 more than I should be paying for it. I know that because I bought a lot of these Scarlett Focusrite Scarlett Solo 3rd generations. The price should be $109.
Right.
They're charging $185 or $190 for it. And that's bogus. I can go to another website, and I'll give props to B&H Photo Video, who's right not far from us in New York, and can ship for free, and they've got it for $109, which is what the price should be, right? It's the same thing with these apps, right? We rely on, and I'm guilty of it too. I look at how many downloads does it have, how many reviews does it have, and what's the average across those reviews. If it crosses a certain threshold, I'm like, okay, it must be an okay app, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not the case. Now, I don't recognize any of the apps that are listed here, thankfully, which means I haven't installed it on my device, right? But it's kind of scary from the App Store perspective that they're bending and twisting and basically committing fraud on that trust relationship that we have as users with the App Store and these specific apps.
remember, you used to be able to see who wrote the various reviews, at least on the Apple side. They had the names, and then they started hiding all that. And when you could see it, I would look at some apps, and it was like all the reviews were from people at, the company that wrote the app. We're all giving it 5 stars. Real credible reviews there, folks. Yeah, it's an interesting app. It also won't fire on devices that don't have a SIM card, or if they have a SIM card issued by Verizon or China Mobile. So it's hit or miss whether it's actually fired when you see it. So they're doing a pretty good job of being stealthy. And there's some other things in the article that talk about other ways it's being stealthy. I just thought it was kind of cool that they were hiding out pretty good. But I know if it's got admin and something else happens, it'll wipe the phone, factory reset it for you, just for pleasure.
It's amazing the game of whack-a-mole that certainly Google has to play with all these apps. Apple as well. What was that? No, what is it? What is going on?
Somebody letting air out of a balloon.
I think it was Larry. I blame Larry. Hey, you know what? I think I should take us out tonight.
He who denied it supplied it.
Absolutely.
Joff, that will conclude this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. Joff, take us out.
Over and out.